Hello and welcome to the Action Network podcast. I'm Sean Zerillo, joined today by Eric Raskin and Bryan Fonseca to break down Saturday's super middleweight main event between Canelo Alvarez and Jermell Charlo going live at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. Ring walk should be sometime after 11 p.m. Eastern. Main card starts closer to 8 p.m. Showtime pay-per-view. Canelo coming in as around a minus 400 favorite, around 80% in the implied odds market. Fight favored to go to a decision pretty heavily as well, about minus 250 to the yes. And the draw, the juicy draw, sitting at plus 1800. We're going to break down the technical aspects of this fight, the physical characteristics of both fighters, what's at stake for both fighters, and then get the guys' best bets for both this fight and the other fights on Saturday's card. Eric, I want to turn it to you first. Just talking about the size differential between the two fighters, Jermell Charlo moving up 2 weight divisions here, but he is actually the bigger fighter, 4 inches taller, 3.5-inch reach advantage. I would assume Canelo more filled out for the weight class, probably the bigger hitter, but considering a couple fights back, did go up to light heavyweight, faced a bigger fighter, Dimitri Bivol, struggled with the size a little bit, maybe struggled with the power more though. Just curious how you think the physical characteristics of both fighters are going to match up. Charlo's size advantage, his jab is going to play out in this fight. And then also the age of both fighters, both 33 years old, but Canelo more than 100 professional fights, amateur and professional in his career, I should say. So just whether you think Canelo might be hitting the latter stages of his career here.
So one of my big talking points that not just for this fight, but in boxing in general, I think people overrate the supposed advantage of size. Obviously, weight classes exist for a reason. Size can matter. I'm not going to sit here and tell you Inoue in a way could move up and beat Tyson Fury. There is a point at which it's impossible, but within a weight class or two, people tend to lean on, the bigger man's going to win. And it just doesn't bear out. We see it all the time. Manny Pacquiao beat so many guys who were bigger than him. Canelo moved up in weight and beat guys up until a point. So with this particular fight, I really don't think of size as a significant factor. As you pointed out, Jermell Charlo is taller and longer. Canelo will probably functionally outweigh him 5 or 10 pounds, something like that on fight night. But I think it's more a matter of styles and who's the superior fighter than that Canelo's going to win because he's bigger or anything like that. And I don't think he lost to Dimitri Bivol because Bivol was bigger. I think that was largely stylistic. Bivol using his height advantage in a particular way with such a busy jab, perhaps combined with the question of whether Canelo was starting to slow down with that fight, which factors into what you were asking about the ages. I don't think we knew going into Canelo versus Bivol that perhaps Canelo was starting to show his age. He was still considered the pound for pound champ by most going into that. But when we look at that fight in the context of Canelo's two rather flat performances that have followed against Golovkin and against John Ryder, I think it's pretty fair to question now whether Canelo is, I'm not going to use the word washed. He's nowhere close to that, but getting just a little washy, a little post prime, I think we're there with Canelo. Whereas Charlo, I think, is probably a younger 33. So that's sort of how I would view size as a relative non-factor here. And the question of whether Canelo is a little past his best could go a long way toward determining who wins this fight.
I also saw some murmurings that this has been Canelo's healthiest camp in a while. He's a very active guy. He seems to fight twice a year. He's has more than 60 professional bouts. So, Bryan, just curious on your thoughts. Do you think Canelo's sort of past prime? Do you think he's maybe been banged up in these recent fights? And how do you sort of see the size differential playing out for Charlo in this matchup?
Well, he turned pro in 2005. Canelo Alvarez did. And Jermell Charlo, by the way, turned pro in 2007. So both of these guys went pro very young. Canelo Alvarez has been a pro for longer. He also has 63 professional bouts to Jermell Charlo, who has about 37. So there's sort of the big difference there. But then you have sort of a rest versus, actually being in the ring conversation, because Jermell Charlo has only fought once in each of the last few years. He fought once in 2020. A lot of people only fought once in 2020 because, and then in 2021 and then in 2022, whereas Canelo Alvarez has been active. He had 3 fights in 2021. He had 2 in 2022. And this year, this was going to be his second fight. And even though he's the same age as Jermell Charlo, sneakily, he feels older because, well, one, he's been around a lot longer in terms of like these high profile fights. And Canelo Alvarez really got to the world title scene in like 2010, 2011, where Jermell Charlo was still coming up. He didn't have his first world title shot until 2016. And I just think, going back to what Eric was saying about like just stylistically, Dimitri Bivol, when he beat Canelo Alvarez, it wasn't a size thing. It was kind of like, hey, in Europe, they teach you when you finish with a combination, jab when you're stepping away instead of just stepping away. And Canelo Alvarez had a big problem with that. The size factor here is going to be interesting because Jermell Charlo does have the height and reach advantages. And I was at the press conference when these two were, the fight was being hyped up in New York City. And Jermell Charlo doesn't look like he's going to have a problem with the weight cut because he looked pretty big. And, we'll see. But at the end of the day, it's going up 2 weight classes. And Canelo Alvarez has had experience beating guys. He's not somebody who came up at super middleweight. He was fighting at welterweight and super welterweight when he was coming up and, just gradually progressed. I wouldn't say that he's a bigger guy than like a Caleb Plant, for example. He knocked him out. He knocked out Sergey Kovalev, who was a light heavyweight, who was the light heavyweight boogeyman. So I feel like he can figure out Jermell Charlo relatively easily. And the issue that I have with Jermell Charlo is, while I think he's good enough to win this fight, this is your first fight in 16 months, and you're going to fight Canelo Alvarez, and you're going to move up 2 weight classes to do it. And Canelo Alvarez, while typically not a great starter, he's gotten off to better starts lately. The problem is toward the end. That's where I'm going to have questions, but we could get into that later on.
So let's talk about the technical aspects of this fight. Bryan, you mentioning Bivol exiting with a jab, on those combinations. Charlo, to my knowledge, has a good jab, also has a good left hook. How do you see the exchanges playing out? From my very amateur analysis, it seems like Canelo, durable guy. Charlo going up 2 weight classes, probably going to struggle to knock him out. Just based on the power differential, right? But also seems like a lower volume puncher as compared to Canelo. So how does Charlo win this fight if he's going to be at a power discrepancy and also a volume discrepancy?
Well, that's the question, and that's why Canelo's such a big favorite going into this fight. Not a massive favorite in boxing terms, but still 4-1 basically, right? And I think with Jermell Charlo, the thing is, it's not only that he's moving up 2 weight classes and he's coming off a 16-month layoff, and he's fighting, while he himself is a probably pound for pound top 10 guy. I would say that he is, because undisputed super welterweight champion, moving up to fight undisputed super middleweight champion, 14-pound weight class difference, but still moving up to fight him. He's also facing, of all people, Canelo Alvarez. And the thing with Jermell Charlo is he's given up rounds to Bryan Castaño, Tony Harrison, John Jackson. He was famously losing in that fight before knocking him out. And Jason Rosario got some rounds off of Jermell Charlo. And Canelo Alvarez is better quite considerably, respectfully, than all of those guys. I would say Tony Harrison is the best of that bunch, and you wouldn't say Tony Harrison is anywhere near Canelo Alvarez, with all due respect. And I think that that's going to be the key for me here is, if Jermell Charlo's not going to be as busy, like using your height and your reach is one thing, but Canelo Alvarez has been fighting longer and taller guys for how long at this point? He figures out ways to get to your body. That's going to be the key. Is Jermell Charlo going to be able to withstand the body punching from Canelo Alvarez? That's my biggest question, because Canelo Alvarez is going to get to his left hook. He's going to get to his double left hook, head body or body head. And this is how he's going to be able to close the distance. And Jermell Charlo is not really, to your point, Sean, busy enough to keep Canelo Alvarez off of him for 12 whole rounds. Canelo Alvarez, who's as good at anybody as closing the gap, he's going to have a busier jab. He's going to have to challenge him with his right hand. He has a money right hand. And I'll note that Jermell Charlo, he has 6 knockouts in world title fights. All of them are knockouts, not technical knockouts, just straight knockouts. But Canelo Alvarez is somebody who's never been stopped before. So he's going to have to be busier than he normally would. And I don't know if Canelo's just going to let that happen, because his busy is different than anybody else's busy. So
I can tell from the way that Bryan's talking that I consider Jermell a little bit more of a live dog than you do, Brian. I can tell that it seems, and I'm not picking Jermell to win straight up. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
sounds like you're very confident, or at least a little more confident than I am, that Canelo is going to win this fight. I think the key to everything for Jermell Charlo in this fight is going to be the jab, and I don't expect him to be as effective with it as Bivol was, but he does have a really good jab, and if he can pump it out there consistently, and importantly, not get countered with a left hook from Canelo. That's the thing. You're walking a tightrope. You've got to use the jab, but not leave yourself open to that big counter left hook. If Jermell can do that, if he can be really effective and dictate with the jab, and no, he's not a busy fighter, but neither is Canelo, really. They're both pretty patient fighters who are economical in their output. So I think if Jermell can use the jab, he can certainly pile up some rounds and have a chance in this. Again, I'll come back to the question of whether Canelo has slowed down significantly. That opens the door. It's one of those things where if this was prime Canelo against Jermell Charlo, I wouldn't be hesitating whatsoever to say that Canelo Alvarez wins this fight. But particularly in terms of upper body movement, I've noticed that Canelo is not what he used to be. His last few fights, he's been a little easier to find, not using that upper body movement to set everything up, both offensively and defensively. It just makes me wonder if he's slowed down a little bit, and if Jermell Charlo, if the rust is not a factor, which Bryan kept pointing out, he could be rusty if his hand is healed, which is a bit of a question. That's why he was off so long, and he was willing to keep delaying his planned fight with Tim Tszyu. But then you give him a Canelo Alvarez offer, and he jumps right at it. Maybe the hand is healed, maybe it isn't. So those are sort of some key factors that I'm looking at. But I do consider Jermell a little bit more live here as the 3-1 or so underdog that he is.
If I could say something to the age piece, right? I'll say this. I do have one concern with Canelo Alvarez in terms of slowing down. It's not the Dimitri Bivol fight. He looks so much better than Gennady Golovkin the last time that they fought last year. Until round 8, 9, whatever the case may be. And then it's like, wait a minute. Why is 40-year-old Gennady Golovkin, who BoxRec would still tell you is the best middleweight in the world right now, but why is 40-year-old Gennady Golovkin all of a sudden finding this when Canelo Alvarez, like, why is he slowing down here? Then against John Ryder earlier this year, he gave up a couple rounds toward the end in a fight where, like, I understand John Ryder had only been stopped once before, and John Ryder, when he got stopped, it was an unfair stoppage. He shouldn't have really gotten stopped in that fight. So John Ryder's not a guy that you're just going to put away. But it was a noticeably smaller ring in Mexico. That fight was in Mexico for a reason. And Canelo Alvarez didn't put him away when it looked like he had opportunities to do. So that's where I think Jermell Charlo is going to be the beneficiary, because Canelo seems to, and this could be age, to your point, Eric, and just experience, because 63 pro fights. Yeah. Is he going to fade late in fights? And Jermell Charlo coming off that layoff, is he going to be able to get his rhythm at that point? Because it's not going to come, I don't think, in the first couple rounds for Jermell. He'll hit his gear at some point. Will he close out stronger than Canelo Alvarez and then bank some of those late rounds? That's sort of my question there.
So I don't want to take away from our best bets, which we will talk about in a second, but, just as a general overview, if you think you're interested in betting Jermell Charlo, do you think this is a better live betting spot for him? Do you think it's likelier, given the ring rust, given how Canelo's faded in his recent fights, this may be a better live betting opportunity, likely to get a better price on Charlo after the first couple rounds? Brian?
That's a great question. And because it's pretty good now, at plus 300 on the money line.
How much better is it going to get?
If you don't think Canelo Alvarez is going to win by knockout, or if Jermell Charlo rather is going to win by knockout, then you could just bet him on the points right now, and you could get him at a reasonable number. But there's something to that, because again, if I think, and this is just an old boxing adage, like usually when you're coming off a long layoff, you get off to a slow start in fights, particularly when you're fighting somebody who's better than you, right? And bigger, even though I don't think the size difference is going to matter that much, to Eric's point. But I do think that there's something to that. Like if you watch the first couple of rounds, and then you're banking on Canelo's going to fade again, and then Jermell Charlo is going to kick it up round 5, round 4, something along those lines. I wouldn't wait that many rounds, because at that point, it's Canelo. I mean, it's already tough to beat Canelo in Las Vegas.
Especially when the scorecards are pre-filled out, yes.
Like that's the other thing. So I would say if you're going to do that, you can wait 2 rounds tops, maybe 3. But I also think you're getting good value on it right now. Because if you watch round 1, round 2, and you see something you don't like in Jermell Charlo, you might not want to bet him live at all at that point. And then it'll be too late to bet Canelo Alvarez because the numbers will just not be in your favor.
Eric,
Yeah.
basically same question for you, but also, let's just move into thoughts on like what's at stake here beyond just the title belts. In terms of legacy for Canelo, this seems like a big risk. As a casual boxing fan, Jermell Charlo, not a name I really have in front of mind. Like, it seems like a loss to Jermell Charlo would really do much more for hurting Canelo's legacy than it would for helping Charlo's. And I would assume a Charlo win, likely close competitive decision and likely to lead to a rematch. But assuming Canelo takes care of business here, what's next for him? Are there any other huge fights on the horizon for him in his career?
Yeah, it is definitely a bit of a no-win situation for Canelo, just in the sense that if he wins, people will be reluctant to give him credit for beating a guy 2 divisions smaller than he is. And if he loses, it is a huge hit to his legacy. It's not going to change the fact that he's waltzing into the Hall of Fame on the first ballot. That's already locked up. But his legacy is actually mostly well established at this point, other than the possibility that he has some incredible tail to his career and has a couple more great years in him with some huge victories that somehow push him into the, oh, maybe he's surpassed Julio Cesar Chavez as the all-time greatest from Mexico. That's the potential upside, but it would take a lot to get there. So his legacy is pretty much set, but it is kind of a no-win situation reputation-wise in this particular fight. Whereas I think Jermell Charlo is basically fighting for Hall of Fame consideration. I don't think he has the resume at this point to get in there, but if you add Canelo Alvarez to your record, that changes everything. As far as what would come next, yeah, if Charlo springs the upset, I'm sure there would be a rematch. Canelo has this new 3-fight deal with PBC, and it would make sense for that to be fight number 2, is to take on Charlo again. If this goes according to script, whether by pre-filled scorecard or the sort of conventional thinking of what's going to happen in the fight, if Canelo wins, then the interesting possibility that the name that is starting to get floated out there, that I don't know how realistic it is, but boy, would it be huge, is this idea of Bud Crawford moving up from 47 to take on Canelo, which I think is a highly competitive fight, even though they're 3 divisions apart. I honestly don't have an easy time picking a winner in that fight. So, I mean, I would love to see something like that. But otherwise, you're looking at something like Canelo perhaps taking on Jermall Charlo to with sort of a Charlo twin brother revenge factor as the plot line, or maybe going back up and taking that Bivol rematch. He's got a few options to consider if he wins this. And I saw Bryan shaking his head, and yes, I agree. If he fought Bivol again, bad idea. But he does seem determined to try to avenge that loss.
Haven't you guys seen the videos? Bud Crawford's going over to MMA. He's got elite takedown defense. He's got incredible wrestling. No, I really think if Bud Crawford wanted to go over and compete in MMA, he would be elite at it. That guy's just an absolutely insane athlete. Bryan, same question for you. What fights do you want to see for Canelo before his career ends?
David Benavidez is the one for me. That's the one I want to see the most. He's another sort of one of the best guys at super middleweight, has a title, I believe an interim title, but a title. And Canelo Alvarez, like this would be an all Mexican showdown. You could obviously put it, on the West Coast or in Mexico, and it would be huge. David Benavidez is not a crossover name, but he's becoming a bigger name in boxing at least. And, that counts for something. And he's somebody who had a pay-per-view earlier this year where he beat Caleb Plant. Didn't stop him, almost did, won a comfortable decision against a guy who's very credible, who Canelo beat before. And I think that's sort of the guy that will be the test for me in terms of, is Canelo truly past his prime? Because David Benavidez profiles as the guy who is bigger, who is probably stronger. I don't know if he's faster. Maybe some people say he would be than Canelo Alvarez. And he sort of profiles as that guy who can really push an all-time great like Canelo, who's in the latter stages of his true greatness, we think, to the limits and potentially beat him. I just think that if you build somebody to beat Canelo Alvarez in this division in a lab, he would look a lot like David Benavidez. He would just probably stay out of trouble a little bit more. And other than that, The Terrence Crawford one is interesting. I have a hard time seeing Terrence Crawford fight Canelo Alvarez just because like the weight disparity. But I think Terrence Crawford's daring enough to do it. I don't know how it benefits Canelo Alvarez to fight somebody even smaller than Jermell Charlo though. And I think
It's a
realistically, if
bigger
you're
name
looking,
though.
yeah,
It's a bigger
if
name.
you're looking at a 3-fight deal with PBC, I think for Canelo Alvarez, what should be next is honestly David Benavidez or Jermall Charlo. But Jermall Charlo hasn't fought in 2 years, and he needs
Right.
to get back in the ring and fight somebody. And I think Jermell Charlo is playing with house money, where if he's competitive at all and loses his fight, then yeah, we'll want to see him fight Terrence Crawford at 154. He would be the underdog in that fight too, with I think more at stake. But I think that's sort of direction we should be heading at least. But in boxing, you don't always, get what you should get. So whatever.
Especially when it comes to deserved scorecards at the end of fights. And before we get to our best bets for this fight, the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM, use bonus code ACTION when signing up to get $1,500 bonus paid back if your first bet loses for new users in Arizona, Colorado, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, and Wyoming. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 or older. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. Gentlemen, more memories are made when you're there live for NFL action. And when you need tickets, our friends at Ticketmaster have got you covered. As the official marketplace of the NFL, Ticketmaster gives you more ways to find your perfect seat. Their interactive seat map gives you 360-degree previews of your section to make sure you have the best view of those pivotal plays. And if your plans change, Ticketmaster gives you more flexibility to sell or transfer your tickets. Plus, mobile tickets make getting in on game day a breeze, and you can even customize your Ticketmaster app to rep your team's colors. Find tickets today at Ticketmaster.com/NFL. Let's talk about our new sponsor, Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit. Factor hooks you up with delicious, chef-prepared, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your house. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with a healthy lifestyle. There are 3 main things we love about Factor. Number 1, no chopping, prepping, or cleaning up. I hate chopping. Always think I'm going to lose a finger. Number 2, you get great flavor and the nutritional quality you need. And number 3, Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes. So run your own 2-minute drill with Factor and enjoy eating well without the hassle. Just head to factormeals.com/Action Network Pod 50 and use code Action Network Pod 50. That's 50 to get 50% off. That's code Action Network Pod 50 at factormeals.com/Action Network Pod 50 to get 50% off. That's quite a bit of talking for me. So I'm going to throw it back to you guys for some best bets for Canelo and Charlo. I'm looking forward to this one. I think even Dana White is looking forward to this one. Frankly, I was at a UFC card where the fights were going on right in front of him, and Dana is looking down at the Canelo fight on a TV monitor in front of him. So I think he just canceled the UFC cards for this weekend. He wants to be home watching Canelo and Charlo, and it's my anniversary. I'm going to find a way to watch the fights as well. So, gentlemen, Eric, I want to start with you first. Best bet for this fight from a pre-fight perspective, and then any thoughts on a live betting perspective, because we might have skipped over you before on that as well.
Yeah, so first I'll just say that I don't intend to bet just the straight up money line on either side on this one, but if I did, I do think I'd sooner go Charlo at 3-1 or so than lay 4-1 on Canelo. But my favorite bet for this fight, I have a few wacky props that I like that I'll get to, but my favorite relatively straightforward bet actually kind of flies in the face of some of what Bryan was saying about Canelo fading late in recent fights, and that is true. But this is a guy who has 13 knockouts in his career in the 8th round or later, which is a really rare number of knockouts that late to get that high. I had looked up just for point of comparison. Manny Pacquiao, who had about as many pro fights and was a good puncher himself, had 8 knockouts at 8th round or later. Floyd Mayweather, same, 8 in the 8th round or later. 13 for Canelo is a lot. He traditionally has had late power in his career. So Canelo KO rounds 7 through 12. I see this as likely a close competitive fight where it kind of goes back and forth. They trade some rounds. They each have some success. But I wonder if Canelo, not having had a knockout in a little while, is just going to be really hungry to step on the gas, put the pressure on more as the rounds go on, sort of like he did against Caleb Plant, and maybe deliver that knockout in the second half. And I'm seeing that one as high as plus 500 for a KO in the second half of the fight. That's my favorite relatively straightforward bet on this fight. As far as a few additional bets that I love, if you want to bet a little to possibly win a lot, you mentioned the draw, 18-1. These guys have both had fights end in draws. We know strange things happen on Canelo scorecards. I will note one of the judges on this fight is Steve Weisfeld, who is like the best judge in the sport by far, and somehow like has avoided pretty much ever having a controversial scorecard. So I expect one scorecard at least that reflects the fight accurately, but you never know about the other two. So a draw at 18-1 is intriguing. I saw a prop on Charlo to be knocked down 2 or more times at 14-1. You know, is it likely to happen? No, but that's why it's 14-1. If Canelo can drop him once and he gets up and beats the count, then there's a good chance he's going to go down again. And here's my favorite, absolutely absurd one that I saw somewhere. Both fighters to be knocked down at any time in rounds 1 through 6. I realize, unlikely, right? The price plus 18,000, 180-1. If we get that, it's not likely because Canelo has never been down in his career, but come on, 180-1, put $1 down to win 180 if that happens. I flash back to Oscar De La Hoya against Ike Corte. They traded knockdowns in the 6th round. If Canelo suffers a flash knockdown somehow, gets up wanting to get revenge, scores a knockdown of his own, at 180-1, I got to take a flyer on that. And then just as far as the live betting, I do agree with what Bryan was saying. I think you're getting pretty good value on Charlo now. I'm not sure you're going to find better value as the fight wears on. And again, because I believe a late knockout from Canelo is possible, I'm a little less inclined to bet on Charlo mid-fight.
Yeah, as soon as you mentioned that, Canelo late prop, I was like, okay, he's out on Charlo live. Do you think the Canelo late knockouts, the fact that he's had so many, is a product of the body work he puts in on opponents?
Absolutely. That's the body work in combination with the way he'll usually steadily build pressure as a fight wears along. Those two things together. Yeah, and I fully expect him to target Charlo's body in this fight. So the likelihood of him stopping Charlo in the first 6 rounds, that's fairly remote. It could happen, of course, anything's possible, but if he's going to get the stoppage, I think it's much more likely to happen between 7 and 12.
Bryan, I want to toss it to you for your favorite ways to bet this fight. Eric leaning with a variety of props, but Canelo just straight up to win by knockout, plus 280. Charlo, plus 950 by knockout. Canelo, minus 120 by decision. Charlo, plus 480. Any of those props interest you, Bryan, or are you just going with the straight up money line bet?
Definitely not, because minus 430 is not something that I'm going to entertain with the money line, which I think is minus 480 right now. But I did already bet Canelo by unanimous decision at plus 125. So instead of just a decision, which was minus 150 when I saw it, I did grab the unanimous decision at plus 125. That's sort of my favorite bet going into this fight. I feel like it's a safe one, because while I think Jermell Charlo has moments, has rounds, I think Canelo Alvarez, putting him away on the scorecards, is just the most likely outcome. And if you could still find him, Canelo Alvarez, a unanimous decision at plus odds, then I would still take that. Now, I do have some wacky bets as well. A few. I'm gonna really focus in on 3 or 4. One very similar to what Eric laid out. I have Jermell Charlo being knocked down between rounds 1 through 6 at plus 650. And that's something that, again, is the slow start going to be, sort of hurtful enough to where Canelo Alvarez could actually catch him early. Flash knockdown, maybe. We saw it, with even Tank Davis and Ryan Garcia earlier this year. Just in the second round, we saw it, and a lot more with Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence. But is that something that could happen, right? Jermell Charlo just gets caught early. Welcome back to the ring after 16 months. And Canelo just sort of tests him and finds him early. That's something that I like and will probably put not a lot on. I'm not putting a lot on any of the long shots, but, I'll put a little bit on that. And while Canelo has gotten off to good starts and then lately has sort of faded late in fights, and it's really only been like a a 3-fight thing. It's happened in his last 3 fights. I still think there's reason to bet Canelo Alvarez to win late. I put rounds 9 through 12 at plus 700 because I could actually see this fight unfolding a lot like the Caleb Plant fight for some reason. And Caleb Plant physically 6'1", 74-inch reach, Jermell Charlo 6 foot 73-inch reach. I think Jermell Charlo could fight in a similar way that Caleb Plant did. And Caleb Plant had some success against Canelo Alvarez at different points, won a few rounds, but ultimately got caught in the 11th round, got dropped once, got dropped again, got stopped, and Canelo Alvarez sort of didn't let up after that. But I could see this fight sort of happening. If Canelo gets a stoppage, I think it's going to be very similar to what he did to Caleb Plant. So I would take a shot at that. That was Canelo to win rounds 9 through 12 plus 700 as just sort of a long shot. I feel like, those are good enough odds to do it. Again, knockout, not likely, but it wasn't likely for Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence either. And boy, did we get one. And the next one, this is, let me see. Canelo Alvarez to win by split decision at plus 1,000 and by majority decision at plus 1,600. I feel like when the fights, you feel like they're going to be pretty close. This is just me sort of taking a shot on there might be some wackiness with the scorecards. And Jermell Charlo maybe, wins 6 rounds on a card when he should have won 4. And then there was no knockdown. So wait, there's a 114. How did that sneak in there? Boxing is boxing. Sometimes you just got to bet on boxing being boxing. There have been cards that I've bet on somebody who I wasn't sure if they were going to actually get the decision, but they're the A side. They got the money behind them. So you have to sort of put like a 20% conspiracy theory bet on it. And I've won that way because this sport is this sport. So if Jermell Charlo, if it's one of these situations where Jermell Charlo actually looks like he deserves to win, looks like he deserves the upset, you can still see Canelo Alvarez getting the decision. So split decision, majority decision, I think maybe $1 or $2. That'll still buy you lunch in some parts of the country at plus 1,000 or plus 1,600. So those are some long shots that I sort of circled. And I may look for some more 180 to 1 props that Eric laid out because, man, if you're telling me I could put down $1 and if the wacky thing happens, I get 180, then I might be set for, a day or two.
Yeah, I mean, remember with Spence Crawford, the wacky one that I threw out on that was a knockdown in the first 4 rounds at 16 to 1, and we all were like, it's not going to happen, but that's a nice price, and then it happened. So you don't want to not bet this, and then it happens, and then you're kicking yourself forever.
You also mentioned the worst bet you had ever seen, which was under 2.5 or under 1.5 knockdowns.
Under 1.5, yeah.
Minus 1 million, and that would have ended up losing. So It was indeed the worst bet you had ever seen, and the worst bet you had ever seen would have lost. That 180 to 1 that Bryan referenced, that was both fighters to score a knockdown in rounds 1 through 6, correct, Eric?
Right. Both fighters have to touch the canvas in the first 6 rounds for that one to pay.
And the other bets that the guys mentioned, Charlo to score 2+ knockdowns at plus 1,400, Canelo to win by KO in rounds 7 through 12, plus 500. The draw at plus 1,800 could see being worth a sprinkle. Canelo by unanimous decision. Bryan like that if you can get plus money. To score a knockdown in rounds 1 through 6 at plus 650. To win by KO in rounds 9 through 12, plus 700. Split decision for Canelo, plus 1,000. And majority decision, plus 1,600. Guys, you really like this fight card too beyond the main event. And I'm curious what other undercard bets you might have. The most identifiable name for me was your Dennis Ugas fighting, I believe, right before Canelo. I doubt you're laying minus 260 to bet the Cuban, but any bets that you really like on this undercard? Bryan, going to start with you first.
So your Dennis Ugas is the co-feature. He's fighting Mario Barrios, which apparently is an interim title fight somehow, but whatever. Boxing, it happens. Ugas, we haven't seen him since Errol Spence stopped him last April. So we talk about long layoffs. This is a 17-month one for your Dennis Ugas, who had an eye issue, so he's been out of the ring for a while, but famously defeated Manny Pacquiao. Manny Pacquiao's last fight probably should have gotten the nod against Sean Porter when they fought. And your Dennis Ugas is very, very skilled. I bet him to beat Mario Barrios by decision at minus 110 when I got it. That was earlier this week. So while I think Mario Barrios is very skilled, I think Ugas is just better, and I think he'll win that fight. But Barrios, I consider him a live dog for that fight because he's actually, he's not. I'm not worried about ring rust with him, so I could even talk myself into betting Ugas live because he may get off to a slow start for the first round or two because he hasn't been in the ring for a long time. So that's something that I would sort of track. Elijah Garcia is in a very fun fight with Jose Resendez, and Elijah Garcia is sort of one of these up and coming prospects. Resendez, he beat Jarrett Hurd earlier this year, which was an upset. And Elijah Garcia, I think, wins this fight. Now, a knockout was plus 110. Decision was plus 170. Excuse me. Knockout was plus 110. Decision was plus 170. I went with the knockout. I wouldn't put a lot on it, though. Resendez has never been stopped. He has been dropped. He has never been stopped. But Elijah Garcia's got heavy hands, and I think he can finish him. And the most entertaining fight on this card, arguably, or at least say for the main event, Jesus Ramos and Erickson Lubin. And you want to talk about some heavy hitters on this card? I bet Jesus Ramos to win by knockout, minus 150 knockout or TKO. Not like tremendous value there, but I think that's the outcome. Erickson Lubin's been stopped twice before, once by Jermell Charlo in the first round, and also against Sebastian Fundora, but he pushed him and dropped Fundora in that fight. So I think Ramos, he'll be pushed a little more than he was against Joey Spencer, but Lubin's a great challenge for him. But Jesus Ramos could come out looking like the sort of star, the show stealer of the night, because I think a lot of people could potentially be very impressed with what he brings to the table to a guy who's been a contender, been at championship level, and has fought in big fights before.
So is your Dennis Ugas by decision minus 110, and maybe an Ugas live entry, Elijah Garcia by KO at plus 170, and then Jesus Ramos by KO at minus 150. Eric, favorite undercard bets, favorite fights you're looking forward to? You looking forward to that Ramos fight as well?
Oh, absolutely. The whole undercard is stacked in a way that pay-per-view undercards for boxing usually are not. This is the card that will tell you based on when people arrive for your pay-per-view party whether they're serious boxing fans or not. This is one where if you just roll in for the main event, you're not a real fight fan. But I love the whole undercard. The Ramos Lubin co-feature is fascinating, and I kind of was leaning on that one toward the Ramos by KO in the first 6 rounds at plus 300, just because Lubin has proven a little chinny, sometimes a lot chinny in the case of his fight with Charlo, actually, where he got stopped in the first round. So chance of a Ramos early stoppage there if it turns into a real trading punches kind of war. I agree with what Bryan was saying, that Ramos has this real star potential, and this could be the fight that really establishes him as that next big thing. I had the exact same bet on the Elijah Garcia fight. Garcia by KO is my favorite in that one. I think you said plus 110 on that, right, Bryan? Was plus for the KO? Yeah, that was what I saw, and that one I like quite a bit. Ugas Barrios is the toughest one for me to bet. Also, probably the one I'm looking forward to the least of the three, though I am still looking forward to it. It just stylistically, I'm not quite sure what to expect. And on that one, again, I'm a kind of drawn toward another draw. That one I'm seeing 16-1 on the draw. Barrios Ugas. It could be that kind of fight. So if I'm going to bet that one, which I may just stay away entirely, but if I am, rather than taking a side, I may just go ahead and plunk a couple bucks down on the draw at 16-1.
I love a draw for that fight, by the way. I love a draw for that
It has
fight.
that kind of potential, right?
Yeah. I'm probably going to put a couple dollars on that, actually.
All right, so Ugas draw plus 1,600, main event draw plus 1,800, parlayed 322-1. I will not be here after next week because I will be living on an island that I purchased with all that money.